Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Inugami Curse by Seishi Yokomizo. Translated by Yumiko Yamazaki. The Fingerprint on the Watch. You met with Take here last night? All at once, a slight hint of suspicion flickered in Chief Tachibana's eyes. Kindaichi too frowned with a puzzled look and stared at Tamayo's pale, bloodless profile, sphinx-like in its inscrutability. What business did you have with him? Oh, no. I suppose it was Take who asked you to come. No, that's not right, Tamayo stated crisply. I was the one who asked him to come and meet me here about 11 last night. Having said that, she turned her eyes hesitantly toward the surface of the lake. The wind must have picked up, for the rhythm of the rain beating on the waters grew more violent and chaotic, portending a storm. Tachibana and Kindaichi looked at one another again. Oh, I see. Tachibana cleared his throat with effort. And what business did you have with him? You said you had something you wanted to discuss with him in private? Yes, that's correct. There was something I wanted to tell Take in secret, without letting anyone else know. And that was? Tamayo suddenly turned her eyes from the lake back to the chief's face. Yes, with all that has happened, I will tell you everything, frankly and honestly, she said with a steady gaze, as if she had made up her mind, and began her curious tale. Mr. Inugami was very good to me. Ever since I was a child, he always treated me with love and kindness, as if I were his granddaughter. I'm sure both of you know that already. Indeed, Kindaichi and Tachibana knew it very well. The old man's affection for Tamayo was obvious from the contents of his will. Seeing the two of them nod in silence, Tamayo continued, a faraway look coming to her eyes. One time, Mr. Inugami gave me a watch. Not recently. It was when I was still in pigtails. A Tavanes pocket watch. A hunter that Mr. Inugami had. It wasn't a lady's watch, but child that I was, I had fallen in love with it for some reason. And whenever I was near Mr. Inugami, I would ask him to take it out of his pocket and let me touch it. Then, one day he laughed and said, Oh, if you like it so much, Tamayo, I'll give it to you. It's a man's watch, though, so you won't be able to carry it with you when you grow up. But, yes, I know, you can give it as a gift to the man you marry. Until then, you take good care of it, all right? He was joking, of course, but saying that, he gave the pocket watch to me. Chief Tachibana and Kindaichi, looking confused, stared at Tamayo's profile. What connection did this watch have with the events of last night? Both men, however, hesitated to interrupt her. Instead, they waited silently, for they saw that despite the grisly situation they were involved in, a look of indescribably tender love had flooded over Tamayo's brows, eyes, and lips as she had spoken about the late Sahe. Still, with a dreamy look, Tamayo continued her strange tale. I was so thrilled. I always kept the watch with me, even putting it by my pillow when I went to bed. Tick-tock, tick-tock, listening to that clear, sharp sound was such a delight. I treasured it, but being a child, I'd sometimes damage it, winding it too tight or accidentally getting it wet. When that happened, it was always Kiyo who would fix it for me. At the mention of that name, Tamayo's fairy tale of long ago gradually began to acquire an air of reality. The two men's expressions became more tense. Kiyo and I are only 3 years apart, but he was always very skillful with his hands, even as a boy, and he loved working with mechanical things. He was very good at doing things like assembling a radio or building an electric train, so repairing my watch was a piece of cake for him. "Tamayo, did you break your watch again? Shame on you," he'd scold me. But when he saw me looking so sad, he'd say, "Okay, I'll fix it. It'll be ready tomorrow. I'll fix it for you tonight." And the next day, he'd place the watch in my hand, as good as new, always smiling, laughing, teasingly saying, "Ha ha 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 ha! Tamayo, you have to take better care of your watch. After all, you're going to give it to the man you marry when you grow up, aren't you? You have to treat it with more tender, loving care," he'd say, poking my cheek gently with his forefinger. As she told her tale, Tamayo's cheeks colored ever so slightly, and her beautiful eyes glistened more brightly as if they had become moist. Kindaichi pictured Kiyo with his sinister rubber mask. Today, there was no trace of the past in that hidden, disfigured face, but the features of the mask that had been made identical to his former self were indescribably handsome even in their eeriness. His photograph in the life of Sahe Inugami too showed that Kiyo had been an extremely attractive young man. No doubt he had inherited his looks from Sahe, who had even aroused homoerotic passions in Tamayo's late grandfather, Daini Nonomiya. The episode Tamayo related had probably taken place when she was still in elementary school and Kiyo in junior high. What emotions had stirred between this young, doll-like pair, and what plans had Sahi made for them as he watched them? Kindaichi suddenly remembered the scene with Monkey's chrysanthemum dolls. In the kabuki play Chrysanthemum Garden, the former General Kiichi presented the young lord and warrior Ushiwaka, who had entered his household disguised as a servant, not only with his secret book of military tactics, but with his daughter, Princess Minazuru, as well. Among Monkey's chrysanthemum dolls, Kiichi had been made to look like Sahe, while the young hero Ushiwaka resembled Kiyo, and Princess Minazuru, Tamayo. Did this mean that Sahe had planned from long ago to make Kiyo and Tamayo husband and wife, and to bestow upon them not the secret book of military tactics as in the play, but the axe, zither, and chrysanthemum, the right to inherit the Inugami fortune? Of course, it was Monkey, not Sahe, who had made the chrysanthemum dolls, so Kindaichi could not be certain that they reflected Sahe's wishes. Besides, Monkey was not a man of normal intelligence. Could it not be, however, that with the God-given instincts of such individuals, instincts that are so often sharper than those of ordinary people, Monkey had subconsciously guessed Sahe's feelings? Or perhaps, fond of Monkey's naive directness, had Sahe secretly told him his plans. If that were so, then Monkey might have made the dolls as a comment on the Inugami clan's recent situation, laying aside the question of Sahe's possible intentions. Therefore, Monkey, for one, must have felt that Kiyo should be Tamayo's husband and that the 3 heirlooms should be presented to them and them alone. But Kiyo was no longer the Kiyo of yesteryear. Those handsome features had been totally destroyed. Remembering that horribly mutilated, disgusting mass of flesh he had seen that day, Kindaichi felt a shudder of horror and was overwhelmed by a hopeless gloom. His meandering thoughts, however, were soon interrupted when Tamayo, after a period of silence, once again began to speak. During the war, something went wrong with my watch again. But by then Kiyo, who had always fixed it for me, was no longer in this house. He had been drafted and was fighting on the battlefields somewhere in Southeast Asia. Tamayo's voice faltered a bit, but quickly, clearing her throat, she continued. I just couldn't bear to take that watch to a shop to be repaired. For one thing, I had heard from time to time that with such a fine watch, there was a danger they would switch the movement for something inferior. The other reason was that I had come to feel that the only person who should ever repair that watch was Kiyo. I didn't want to hand it to anyone else, even for a short while. So, for a long time now the watch has not kept accurate time, but since Kiyo has finally returned. Tamayo hesitated a moment, but quickly seemed to urge herself on. And seems to have gotten quite settled now. I took the watch to him several days ago and asked him to repair it. Kindaichi suddenly became very interested, and was his habit when thus aroused, he began enthusiastically scratching his head. He did not yet understand what exactly Tamayo wanted to say, or what thoughts lay in her mind. Nevertheless, there was something that was exciting him intensely, and he continued scratching his head with wild abandon. And did Kiyo repair the watch for you? Tamayo slowly shook her head. No, he took it in his hand and looked at it for a while, but he said he didn't feel like repairing it then and would do it some other day. Then he handed the watch back to me. Having spoken thus, Tamayo fell silent. Chief Tachibana and Kindaichi, expecting more, watched Tamayo's face with bated breath, but she remained turned toward the lake and seemed loath to open her mouth again. Tachibana looked confused and scratched the side of his head with his little finger. I see. And what does this have to do with the events of last night? Tamayo did not answer his question, but abruptly turned her account in another direction. I'm sure you both know what happened in this villa last night. There was a big fuss because Take and Tomo brought back Kiyo's handprint from Nasu Shrine and tried to use it as... what's the right word? Tamayo shuddered slightly. Evidence? Yes, though that's an unpleasant word. As evidence to check Kiyo's identity. For some reason, Mrs. Matsuko obstinately refused to let Kiyo give them his handprint, and all Take's and Tomo's efforts came to naught. But then I suddenly remembered something. The other day, as I told you, I went to ask Kiyo to repair my watch and he refused. After returning to my room though, I just happened to open the lid and saw Kiyo's right thumbprint pressed clearly on the back of it. Kindaichi suddenly jerked, as if struck by lightning. Yes, this was what had been exciting him so intensely. Kindaichi again began furiously, scratching his head this way and that, his hair now a tangled mess. Chief Tachibana, appalled, stared at him for a while, but eventually turned back to Tamayo and said, "But how could you be certain that was Kiyo's fingerprint?" Stupid question. Wasn't it obvious? Tamayo spoke as if Kiyo's fingerprint had been pressed there accidentally, and she had later discovered it accidentally. But how could that be true? No doubt she had planned ahead and set a trap for Kiyo, intending from the first to get his fingerprint somewhere on the watch. Yes, this was what had been exciting Kindaichi so intensely. What an intelligent and, at the same time, what a cunning woman Tamayo was. I don't think there could be any mistake. I wiped and polished the watch completely before taking it to Kiyo, and the only two people who handled the watch were he and myself, since that print is not mine. I'm right, Kindaichi thought. Tamayo had wiped the watch clean, planning to obtain Kiyo's fingerprint. How ingenious she was, though, to think of the back of the lid. What better place to preserve a fingerprint? Tachibana too finally seemed convinced. I see. And? Yes, and Tamayo kept searching for words. And seeing Mrs. Matsuko's attitude last night, I knew we could not hope to obtain Kiyo's handprint any time soon. But to leave the situation as it was would mean making Take and Tomo, and their parents as well, even more suspicious. So when I remembered Kiyo's thumbprint on the watch, I felt it best to make things certain as quickly as possible. And at the risk of being a little presumptuous, I decided to ask Take to compare it with the handprint on the scroll. I see. And you asked Take to come here to speak to him about that? Yes. That was about 11 last night? It was exactly 11 when I left my room. I knew that if Monkey found out, he would insist on coming along. I couldn't have that, so I first retired to my bedroom and then waited until 11 to sneak out. Just a minute, Kindaichi interjected for the first time. Could you please tell us what happened then in detail? If it was exactly 11 o'clock when you left your room, then that means it must have been about 2 or 3 minutes past 11 when you arrived here. Was Take already here? Yes, he was. He was standing by the edge there, looking out over the lake and smoking a cigarette. When you came up the stairs to this observation deck, was there anyone else about? I don't know. I didn't notice anyone. But it was so cloudy and dark last night. I don't think I would have noticed even if someone had been. I see. Then you told Take about the watch? Yes. And the watch? I gave it to him. He was very happy and said he would ask Mr. Furudate to bring the scroll over first thing tomorrow and compare the prints. What did Take do with the watch? I think he put it in his vest pocket. Since Take's body had not been discovered yet, however, they had no way of knowing whether it was still there. And about how many minutes did you remain here talking? Not more than 5, I would think. I didn't want to stay alone with Take in a place like this for very long, so I said what I had to as quickly as possible. I see. So you went your separate ways by about 7 or 8 minutes past 11. Who left first? I did. Then Take remained behind alone. What was he doing? Tamayo suddenly flushed. For some time, she stared straight ahead with blazing eyes, crumpling her handkerchief in her hands. Suddenly, she shook her head fiercely, as if angry, and said, Take acted very rudely toward me. As I started to leave, he suddenly pounced on me, and I think it must have been that. I think it must have been then that I lost my brooch. If Monkey hadn't come just then, I don't know what would have happened to me. Tachibana and Kindaichi exchanged glances. So, Monkey was here too? Yes, I thought I'd managed to sneak out without him noticing, but he had found out and had followed me here. But I'm so thankful now that he did. If he hadn't come, what did Monkey do to Take? I'm not sure of the details. After all, Take had me in his arms and I was desperately trying to free myself. But all of a sudden, Take cried out and fell. Yes, that was when the chair was overturned. Take fell onto the floor. I looked up and there was Monkey standing there. He helped me and I ran away from this place as fast as I could. Take was still on the floor, on his knees, muttering abuses. I see. Then the murderer must have come after that, killed Take and cut off his head. Did you notice anyone as you were leaving? No, I didn't. Like I said, it was pitch black outside. Besides, I was so upset. Tamayo's tale had come to an end.
Well, thank you very much, Chief Tachibana said. I'm sorry to have troubled you.
At his words, Tamayo stood up, but Kindaichi stopped her. Just a moment. One more question. What do you think about that masked man? Do you think that really is Kiyo or... The blood drained from Tamayo's cheeks. For a long time, she stood staring fixedly at Kindaichi's face, but soon answered in an emotionless voice. Of course, I'm convinced it's Kiyo. Take's and Tomo's suspicions are absurd. Yet Tamayo had deliberately set out to trick him into giving her his fingerprint. Thank you very much. That's all then. Tamayo acknowledged Kindaichi with her eyes and descended from the observation deck almost simultaneously. Furudate returned.
Oh, you're still here. Matsuko is asking all of you to come to the house.
Any particular reason?
Yes,
said Furudate, a slightly bewildered expression on his face.
It's about, the handprint.
She says she wants to have Kiyo make a handprint in front of everyone.
The abandoned boat.
The wind that had begun to gust earlier became increasingly stormy, and shadowy blasts and rain thrashed the waters of the lake in frenzied fury. As with all mountain storms, a peculiar sense of the surreal hung in the air. The clouds overhead were oppressively low, and the lake groaned as if possessed, while the dark, turbid waters surged, frothed, and tumbled with a fiendishness different from that seen at sea. Anyone daring to peer into the depths of the lake would have quaked at seeing the eerie masses of dark weeds intertwining, tangling, and rubbing against each other like a woman's hair. A single bird, propelled by the wind, darted diagonally across the lake like a spirit. Surrounded by this raging storm, the 12-mat room deep inside the Inugami villa was fraught with tension. Among the members of the clan once again assembled before Sahe's photograph. Inner conflicts, no less violent than the storm outside, were seething in ominous silence. The masked Kiyo sat with Matsuko at the head of the room with the hand scroll from Nasu's shrine. In addition, a sheet of white paper, an inkstone with red ink,
and a brush were placed in front of them. Takeko, the mother of the murdered Take, sat limp and dispirited, eyes red from weeping. But she shot looks in Matsuko's direction that bristled with inordinate hostility. Tomo, with frightened eyes, constantly bit his fingernails. Kindaichi studied the faces of the people in the room, one by one, but it was Tamayo whom he watched with the most interest. Even he, however, could not fathom her true feelings, for she simply sat pale and icily beautiful. Surely she harbored serious doubts about the masked man, scheming as she had to obtain his fingerprint. And now that he had voluntarily stepped forward to give them his handprint, her mind must be racing. Yet Tamayo simply sat cold and exquisite. A man immediately identifiable as a policeman entered the room and, acknowledging everyone with his eyes, seated himself next to Chief Tachibana. He was a forensics officer the chief had summoned, and his name was Fujisaki.
Mrs. Matsuko, Tachibana said quietly, prompting her to begin. Matsuko nodded and said, "Before I ask Kiyo to make a handprint, I would like you all to hear something." She cleared her throat softly. "I'm sure you have already heard, Chief Tachibana, but a scene similar to this one occurred last night in this very room. Take and Tomo tried to force Kiyo to give them his handprint. At that time, I refused flatly because they were so rude, treating Kiyo like a common criminal. I was so mortified. I swore to myself that I would never, ever let Kiyo do anything so undignified. Now, however, everything has changed. Since this terrible tragedy has befallen Take and..." Matsuko glared at Takeko. "These people seem to think that Kiyo and I were involved in some way. Even though they say nothing, I can see it in their eyes. Thinking back, though, I guess I can understand their feelings. I admit we may be partly to blame. The fact that I refused so stubbornly last night to let Kiyo make a handprint, if that caused them to suspect that we might have something to hide or caused them to think we might have killed Take, then that was bad judgment on our part. I regret the way I acted, and I realize that circumstances forbid my being stubborn any longer. So, I've decided to have Kiyo make a handprint in front of everyone, with Chief Tachibana as witness. I hope you all now understand how I feel." Matsuko looked around at the others in the room, but no one gave an audible reply. Only Chief Tachibana answered with a nod. "All right then, Kiyo." The masked Kiyo held out his right hand, trembling with what was no doubt excitement. Matsuko dipped the brush deep in the red ink and spread it over his hand until it was bright red. Now the paper. Kiyo spread his fingers wide and placed his hand full on the white paper, pressing down firmly on his hand. Matsuko looked around at the others in the room with spiteful eyes. "Look, everyone," she said. "Kiyo's handprint. No fraud, no tricks. Chief Tachibana, you've witnessed it all. You've witnessed it, all right?"
"Yes, of course. You can move your hand now."
Kiyo lifted his hand, and Tachibana approached and picked up the sheet of paper.
Where's the scroll?
I have it. Furudate took the scroll out of his portfolio and handed it to Chief Tachibana.
Okay, Fujisaki, I'm giving these to you, said the chief. How long before you'll know for sure?
Well, it will take some time for me to write an accurate scientific report, but just to determine if the two handprints are identical or not, I should only need an hour.
Good, then get to work. I should tell everyone in this room that Fujisaki here is an authority on the fingerprints. He may be working in these rural parts, but you can rely on his expertise completely. All right, Fujisaki, we're depending on you.
Yes, sir. As Fujisaki stood up to go with the two handprints, Matsuko stopped him. Just a minute. You said an hour? Yes, I'll come back here to report in an hour's time. Fine. Then would everyone come back to this room in an hour? Chief Tachibana, Mr. Furudate, Mr. Kindaichi, I have some food prepared for you in another room. So please help yourselves. Kiyo, let's go. Matsuko took the masked Kiyo's hand and they stood up. The others too left the room with a variety of expressions on their faces. Tachibana looked relieved.
Well, that's that. I think the tensions made me a little hungry. Mr. Furudate, Mr. Kindaichi, let's avail ourselves of their hospitality.
Guided by the maid, the three men retreated to another room. They had just finished eating when two detectives, soaked to the skin, came bustling in. They were two of the men who had gone to find the missing boat.
Chief, could I speak to you? How's it going? Asked Tachibana. You must be hungry. They prepared some food for us, so why don't you two help yourselves too?
Yes, we will, but before that, there's something we'd like you to come see. From the expression on the detective's face, it appeared that they had found something.
Okay, Mr. Kindaichi, why don't you come along too?
The storm had intensified further, and the wind blew the rain in torrents from the side. With the detectives in front, the men made their way to the sluice gate, holding their umbrellas at an angle. Two boats moored together with ropes, the one in the back covered with a large piece of canvas, were being tossed on the choppy waters like a couple of leaves.
You found the boat?
Yes, we found it abandoned near Cannon Point in Lower Nassau and towed it here. We were lucky. Any later and the rain would have washed away any important piece of evidence. Climbing into the front boat, one of the detectives tugged on the rope attached to the boat behind, drawing it closer, and then removed the canvas. Tachibana and Kindaichi stared aghast at the sight. Dark blood covered the inside of the boat, and a heavy mass of liquid lay on the floor. They remained staring with bated breath at this repugnant liquid for some time. But eventually the chief coughed awkwardly and turned to Kindaichi.
Mr. Kindaichi, I'm afraid you were wrong about this one. The murderer did transport the headless corpse in a boat.
Kindaichi stared abstractedly at the rain falling on the pool of blood. Yes, you're right. I have to admit I was wrong. But, Chief, said Kindaichi, his eyes suddenly feverish. Why did the murderer see a need to do this? Why display the head so conspicuously on top of the chrysanthemum doll like that, and yet feel a need to hide the body? I should think that's an awfully dangerous thing to do.
I don't know. But now that we're sure it was transported in this boat, we're definitely going to have to drag the lake. Detective, will you see to that as soon as you've finished eating?
Yes, sir. By the way, Chief, we've learned something else rather strange.
Strange?
Yes. Sawai's supposed to bring the eyewitness, but... Oh, there he is now.
Led by another detective through the pouring rain, there appeared a 40-ish man wearing a dark blue cotton kimono and a dark blue apron. According to the detective, his name was Kyuhei Shima, and he ran a cheap inn called Kashiwaya in Lower Nasu. Although now consolidated into a single city, Nasu had been divided into Upper Nasu and Lower Nasu until a decade or so ago. The Inugami estate was located at the edge of Upper Nasu and was separated from Lower Nasu by an unpopulated tract of land stretching along the lake for about 2 kilometers. The proprietor of the Kashiwaya Inn began his account. As I just told the detective here, we had an odd guest last night. According to the innkeeper, the man was clearly a repatriated soldier, for he wore a military uniform and military boots, and had a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. That in itself was not unusual. What was strange was that he had a field cap pulled down over his brow, so low as to hide his eyebrows, and a muffler wound around his neck and face, covering even his nose, so that the only visible part of his face was his 2 eyes. At that time, however, neither the innkeeper nor the maid felt wary of him in any way, so he was provided with a room as he requested. After the maid had carried his dinner up to his room, however, she returned to the front desk with a disturbing report. There's something strange about that man. He still has his muffler on even in his room, and when I tried to serve him his rice, he told me to go away. I think he doesn't want anybody to see his face. The innkeeper was made a bit apprehensive by the maid's report. When he went up with the register, he found that the man had finished his meal and had again neatly put on his cap and buried his face deep in the muffler. Nothing else seemed out of the ordinary, but when the innkeeper placed the register in front of the stranger, he said, "You write it for me," and dictated the information. "And here it is," said the innkeeper to Chief Tachibana, showing him the entry in the register. Sanpei Yamada, age 30, unemployed, 321 Kojimachi, Tokyo. "Sawai, did you make a note of this information?" Tachibana asked the young detective. "Yes, I did. Check it out with Tokyo, although it's probably a fake. Please, go on with your story." Prompted by the chief, the innkeeper continued. "I forgot to tell you, but it was about 8 o'clock at night when this man first arrived. Then about 10, he said he was going to visit someone he knew living nearby, and he went out. Of course, he still had his face completely hidden with his cap and muffler. About 2 hours later, around midnight, I was thinking maybe I would go and lock the front door, and as I was doing so, he came back. It didn't bother me at the time, but now that I think about it, he was kind of flustered." "Wait, just a minute," interjected Kindaichi. "Did he have his face hidden then too?" "Yes, of course. It turns out I never once got to see that man's face, because early this morning, about 5 o'clock, he suddenly said he was going and left. He had settled his bill the previous night, but we were all talking about what a strange guest he had been and how there must be something going on, when the maid who had gone to clean his room came back with this." The innkeeper spread before them a thin cotton towel, the sight of which made Tachibana and Kindaichi grow wide-eyed in spite of themselves. Printed on it were the words, "Hakata, Friends of Returning Veterans," indicating that it was one of the towels distributed to repatriated soldiers in Hakata. It was smeared with thick, dark blood. Clearly, it had been used to wipe a pair of bloody hands. Kindaichi and Tachibana exchanged glances. The thought that had flashed through their minds was of the masked Kiyo, who had recently been repatriated through Hakata. From 8 to 10 last night, however, that same Kiyo was supposed to have been surrounded by the members of the Inugami Clan in a room deep inside the villa.